Hey everybody, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Michel Bryant with you for the afternoon session, and so excited that Loni Coombs is with me here, former LA County DA out of Malibu, which I know sounds like a bad TV show, but it was real. And we've got so much to talk about. She's going to join me for not just the case we're covering now, but some other tidbits. So we are back in court live in Vermont. This is the Stephen Bourgoin case. Defense putting on their final witnesses. They should be wrapping soon. Let's go back into the courtroom.
Because he's not so sure. And this, not so sure, is am I being recruited and am I special and this is a good thing? Or why are they targeting me, and have I stumbled across something in my internet research that they, unquotes, don't want me to know? And he starts to toggle back and forth about that. Thursday he's pretty exuberant. He's, oh man, this is great. I get to be something special for the U.S. government, sort of, going back psychologically to his sadness about not being able to be in the Army, I presume. And now he's kind of, whoa, these people are all over me, and I'm not quite sure. And he's going back and forth. Thursday he's positive and excited. Friday he's toggling between excited and moving more towards anxious and paranoid.
What is he anxious and paranoid about?
That he's stumbled on something and they're after him. They're in trouble. He's in trouble because he's found something, with his research with the missile bases and who controls the missile bases and NSA, and he's found something out that he's not supposed to know.
And so he said he leaves at lunch break. Did he report doing anything at the time of lunch?
He did. He goes out and he's driving, listening to the radio, and now the radio is really taking over his interactions with the driving, turning one way, turning the other way, based on the radio is giving him a positive signal that that's the right way to turn, or a negative signal that that's the wrong way to turn, based on his inferences about the songs, the lyrics, the tempos, the music, and what he's thinking that's indicating to him. And he ends up somewhere out near Heinsberg, comes back to work.
Were you ever to verify through any collateral source that he went on a drive out towards Heinsberg on Friday?
There were cell phone records that indicate he went out there. So then he comes back to work, and he's observed coming back to the parking lot and then immediately leaving. Then he goes over to Alan Kosabik's house, and he tells him he's quit. He says something about a test, but he doesn't go into any details. And he doesn't want to divulge. Again, he's not sure about Alan Kosabik. He's not quite sure who he's allowed to tell after this is classified, and he's in this position of being selected or recruited or tested.
And so how is it that the person that you're describing, Mr. Bourgoin, could be, as you're describing, psychiatrically, and then have lunch with Mr. Kosabik, who doesn't notice much of anything?
Sure. Well, he's holding it. He's not telling him. He's holding it. He's holding it tightly. He doesn't want to tell him. He doesn't trust him. He doesn't think he's allowed to tell him. And by that night, he doesn't trust him because, or maybe it was the night before, he had looked at his Bible, Alan Kosabik's Bible, Eastern Orthodox Bible or Russian Bible, and it didn't contain a section from John 3:16 that he was in, that Mr. Bourgoin was familiar with, and he says, "Oh, what's that about? That he doesn't? His Bible is different." He's again reading things into what he perceives about this Eastern Orthodox Bible. Well, does that mean that Alan Kosabik is friend or foe? Starting to have doubts because he's starting to get paranoid generally, even about his friend.
But as far as it making sense that he could be this way and Mr. Kosabik not notice that he's going on, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes sense because Mr. Kosabik didn't appear to, reading the two depositions, Mr. Kosabik didn't seem to notice as much or recall as much as Mrs. Kosabik, who said there's something plainly wrong with him, and I'm concerned. So, you know, I don't know Mr. Kosabik. I don't know how attentive he is. Maybe Mr. Kosabik simply just thought, well, he's just off because he's upset about his daughter. And but again, Mr. Bourgoin is not sharing this information with anybody.
Up until this point, Mr. Bourgoin was continuing to self-medicate with marijuana?
Yes.
Did that stop at some point?
Yes. So on Thursday, he thinks, oh, you know, if you're being selected for this, you know, you should be laying off the marijuana, and that's probably one of the reasons he didn't sleep at all Thursday into Friday, because he didn't get a chance to use the marijuana. He says by Thursday into Friday, he had either decreased or stopped, and then on Friday afternoon, after seeing Kosabik, he threw all his paraphernalia and drugs in the trash.
You've talked about some paranoia that Mr. Bourgoin had. Did he have other thoughts of paranoia during this week period?
Well, eventually he starts thinking that eventually he starts thinking that his daughter's in danger, and even Ms. Lawrence is in danger. But I think that was more by Saturday.
What about with regard to his house? Do you think anything was going on in his house?
Yes, he thought his garage was bugged, and he thought of course the electronics in his house are communicating with him or bugging him, and then eventually he starts thinking he has to sleep downstairs because Homeland Security is going to come and may burn down his house. So then,
does anything happen Friday night that's significant with regard to Mr. Bourgoin?
Yes.
What happens on Friday night?
He goes driving again, listening to the car radio for directions, and then he's also getting directions or making interpretations based on lights in the environment. So he sees the car radio's giving him directions, or he's inferring directions. And by the way, he never said the car radio spoke to him.
Why is that significant?
Well, he never claimed that he heard voices. He misinterpreted benign, neutral material in the environment. He's never really said that he has hallucinations, which I count as important because usually people who are faking, malingering, add a little bit about, oh, you know, the voices told me to do it. And he doesn't do that.
So what happens? You talked about the lights. What is it about? What does it tell you about the lights?
Well, he's making interpretations about the colors of the lights and arrangements in the lights. He goes by an ATM, and the ATM lights are green. He says, well, the bank is closed. Why is the ATM lights on? He thinks that must be sinister. The ATM, the green light for the drive-through, I guess, from the drive-in park ATM, he thinks that must be something sinister, so he drives over and looks at the screen, and he starts thinking the screen on the ATM is referring to him. And then and I'm not sure about the order of that, exactly when that is, but then he eventually keeps driving and he ends up in this field.
So tell me about that.
So as he's driving, he also thinks there's a drone, maybe a drone following him, and he's making and listening to the radio and thinking there's a drone. He's sticking his hand out the window, making hand signals. Again, thinking he's being trailed, and he's signaling. Ends up in this field, has his nap, and on the way he had stopped at McDonald's because he inferred that he was supposed to pick up something to do with pumpkins, and he buys a pumpkin muffin, which he would not ordinarily eat. And he brings it with him, and he's got his pumpkin muffin and a bottle of water and his treasured K-bar knife from the military that he's had for 20 years, and his cell phone. And he gets out of the car, and he sees grass glistening in the moonlight, and he says, oh, that's my pathway. That's for me. That's for me to follow. He misinterprets a benign thing in the environment that this is what he's supposed to follow.
Does he tell you what he thinks is going on? What he thinks is going on?
Yeah, he thinks he's going to, well, he's toggling. He thinks he's going to meet or do some test. He's doing some sort of test or meet some sort of government agent. He's not sure. He's not quite sure what he has to do. It's a test, or he has to meet someone. They're going to meet him there. Government agents are going to meet him there. And by this time, he's carrying his passport around with him. Because as he told Dr. Kapoor, he thought that, he's going to have to quickly travel on short notice and might be, quote, whisked away, unquote. So there he is at the field with his passport and those other items. The passport, he thought, also had certain directions in it, and things would, quote, pop out at him, information in the passport. So he's really quite confused, having thoughts that are all a jumble, and he's frantically trying to figure out what's next, where am I going, what am I supposed to do, and am I safe?
So he's at the field, he sees what he interprets as a path from the moonlight in the grass. What happens?
He follows a pathway, he goes down to a river or a stream, and he's hears some sounds. He throws his knife in the stream.
Why, does he tell you why he does that?
He may have, but I forgot why. By his inferences. Throws his knife in the stream, hears sounds, gets nervous, and runs back to his car. I think, I'm trying to remember where he threw his cell phone in there along with I think that was the second time at the stream he throws his cell phone in. Anyway, he runs back to his car, and then he's there. He's in during this time.
So here we have one of the defense's experts. They've got a series of them lined up, and again, the goal there is to prove that their guy, Stephen Bourgoin, was insane. Not that morning brushing his teeth, not after he went to bed, but at the time of the collisions, which took place around midnight in October of 2016. With me, Loni Coombs. Loni's out here from Los Angeles, working on a tremendous project for Oxygen, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's about the very strange, mysterious case of Rebecca Zahow and the Spreckles Mansion murder. So we're going to get to that in a little bit. First, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We go way back, way back. I was thinking about the other day. We had a lunch one time back in Malibu. She was the writing DA in Malibu, and we had lunch chatting, and at the time I was asking about a producer I wanted to date at Extra. And here we are coming up on 17 years married. So, great advice you must have given.
Thank you.
Okay.
I take all the credit.
Of course. So, this case, let's get back to this case. We're seeing expert testimony here that is critical for the defense, obviously.
Yes.
We also know, and it's a bit of a wrinkle in this case, there was an expert brought in by the prosecution that ultimately had an opinion that would help the defense.
Yes.
What do you do when that happens? What do you have to reveal? How do you deal with that if you're the prosecutor and you get that?
That's a sticky situation, because usually when you're talking about experts, you have the battle of the experts. And so the defense calls an expert that says what they want him to say, and then the prosecution calls an expert that says what they want him to say. So it's a battle of the experts, and a lot of times the juries just say, let's just count it as a wash. And because they kind of equal each other out, and kind of like they're hired guns, do they really mean what they say? In this case, not only did the defense have a doctor that said what they need them to say, but the prosecution's doctor said what the defense need them to say. So now you have two doctors on the defense side. What does the prosecution do? So now they've called another doctor that hopefully will say what they want them to say, but now you have 2 against 1 if anybody's keeping score on the jury.
Then it starts to look a little like, well, how many more experts do you need, Mr. Prosecutor, to finally get the answer you want? It just starts to water down the impact of any of the experts, as you say, and the jury may just say, eh. And remember the key to this case with the preponderance of evidence standard on insanity, folks, if you start out with 50-50, that's 51. I mean, it's a breath of air on one side of the scale. So they've got a very slight burden. How do you think this expert's doing specifically?
He's given a lot of detail. If you believe that the defendant is being honest and truthful, because you always wonder, are they trying to manipulate the doctor? But the doctor has a lot of detail, a lot of information to work with, and he seems to really believe without, he's not wishy-washy on his opinion on this.
Yes, and it's a fine line between being cocky and arrogant and just being credible and confident, right? Okay, we're going to take a quick break. Again, Loni Coombs with me. Great to have you here. We're going to talk more about this case and a few other things that come along right here on the Law&Crime Network. Stay right where you are. We'll be right back. Hey folks, welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Michael Bryant with you for the afternoon session. We are live in that Vermont courtroom. We're going to also update a couple of things for you today. A new trial starting tomorrow in South Carolina. The Merritt case out in California is underway, and a few other items to get to. But right now, we've got a defense expert on the stand in Vermont. This is the Stephen Bourgoin case. This guy is there for one purpose, to prove that the defendant was insane when he drove his car into that carload of teens, killing all 5 of them. Let's go back to court.
Who knows where else he went. He shows up there and he's peculiar, and Asima thinks he's really off.
And you just
And they invite him to stay, even though he lives close by. They said, "You sure you don't want to stay over?" He says, "No, I don't want to stay over."
And does he describe to you, did he describe to you in your interview kind of how he was thinking kind of at that moment when he decides to go over to the Kosovic's residence?
Yeah, he sort of sees I think there's an illuminated doorbell or something, or he sees a light, and then there's, he's not really trustful, and even a little bit starts to not be completely trustful of Asima.
And you talked about this Bible time with Mr. Kosovic. Is that during this 4 a.m. visit?
I forget, it was then, or it was the Thursday interaction with Kosovic. I forget which one it was, but it was John 3:16, and didn't have it in the Bible, and well, how come it's not in your Bible?
And again, how is it that, Alan and somebody like in Mr. Bourgoin's state could be in the presence of 2 people who are only noticing, he seems off, or he seems out of it, and not, they wouldn't pick up on him being as delusional as he's describing?
Well, he's not disclosing. He looks off, but he's not disclosing why, and maybe they think he's simply distraught. After all, it's 4 in the morning for them as well. They were, I guess, sufficiently concerned about him to suggest that he stay over there at 4 in the morning, which would be, he lives around the corner somewhere.
And Mr. Bourgoin leaves their residence at some point.
Yes.
And where does he go?
I presume he went home. He thinks he went home. But the next thing we know where he went is UVM Medical Center.
So now we're into Saturday morning?
Saturday morning.
And so how do we know he arrived at the medical center?
Because we have him on videotape and lots of witnesses.
And were you able to review security video footage and all the medical records from his time at the hospital?
Yes.
And does Mr. Bourgoin describe to you going to the hospital?
Yes.
What does he say about that?
He was, at that time, he was really completely fearful that he wasn't safe. And he was just worried about his safety, and he was also worried that somehow they were going to, whoever they are going to go after Izzy in particular, as well as potentially Ms. Lawrence. And he, for that reason, gives up. His fear drives him to come to the hospital rather than see his daughter, which is the shining light and the only one thing he really wants to do. So to me, it shows how frantic and confused he must have been to go to the hospital. I guess he had a sense that something's wrong, and he felt unsafe.
What was your understanding of when he was supposed to see his daughter?
10 o'clock.
On that Saturday?
Nearby in Essex.
And this would have, so he had a visit on the 1st, and this would be the next Saturday, a 1-hour visit?
Yes.
Jumping back just for a second, Mr. Bourgoin, did he tell you if he went home or not between the Kosovics and, or between the time out in the field and going to the hospital? Did he say that if he went home or not?
I think he said he watched the sun come up, and that he was, I think said he watched the sun come up.
And did he say he did anything with his clothing when he was home?
Oh, yes, you're right. He washed his clothing.
Why did he need to wash his clothing?
They were full of mud from crawling around in the mud in the culverts.
Do you remember if Ms. Lawrence said anything about the state of the home at some point that corroborated whether or not he had been covered in mud?
Yeah, I think she said she saw there was mud in the bathtub.
So, in your opinion, do you believe that Mr. Bourgoin was going to the hospital on Saturday morning because he was suicidal?
No, he was frantic and was concerned about his life. He thought his life was in danger. He wanted to be safe, the exact opposite.
So you've reviewed the videos and the reports. What do you take away from Mr. Bourgoin's visit to the hospital that's relevant to your final opinion? And if you could distinguish between information you're getting from Mr. Bourgoin and information you're actually seeing from the record.
Sure. So he goes to the hospital. I think it was 8:45 in the morning. Gets to the hospital. You see him on tape, and he comes in and he tells me that he's a little paranoid about the construction, and he sees something about brain tumors, and he not quite clear what's going on in the hospital, but he finds his way into a secluded, a secure area just off the emergency room entrance, where the triage nurse sits, or triage lady nurse sits. And they say, "Whoa, what's going on here? Why are you back there? This is staff only." He's looking at a poster, and they call security. Security comes, and he's looking at this poster, and the poster had something to do with needing volunteers for a respiratory study. Anyway, there was some other poster might have had something to do with head injuries. Anyway, so the security guy says to him, "You're not supposed to come this way." And there he is, and then he's, "Do you want to come?" The triage person, "Do you want to come in?" And he says no, and then he leaves.
So what is, and you're getting that from the security cameras and depositions of the security folks, not from Mr. Bourgoin, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what does all of that say to you?
Well, he's confused. He's coming there for help. He's frantic. He's making inferences about the hospital, about the construction and the signs, etc. And then he sort of gets nervous and leaves. But I don't know where he went. But he didn't go. At that point, he could have easily driven to Essex to see his daughter, but he doesn't. He comes back about 45 minutes later. And you see him pulling back in his car, in his truck.
And so then, what is your understanding, again, if you can differentiate between what you're getting from the record and what Mr. Bourgoin tells you, but what's your understanding of what happens when he returns to the hospital?
So he goes back in, and they see him, and they say, "Oh, here's this guy." And security goes and meets him. "Can I help you?" And he wants the security guy gives him a number for this volunteering for some study, that this poster that he saw. Gives him the poster, and then he checks in, and he gets seen by the triage nurse.
Okay. And what, you were able to review the record from the triage nurse?
Yes.
And her deposition?
Yes.
Okay, so what is of significance to you that goes on with Mr. Bourgoin in the triage area?
So as a standard, the nurses, when you go into these situations.
So that is Dr. David Rosemarin. He is the expert for the defense, one of a few they expect to put on to help prove that the defendant in their position was insane at the time of this collision. Loni Coombs still with me here. I'm so happy to have her here. And we're talking about this case, particularly this insanity defense. If you're on the jury and you have to understand the fine lines between insanity and, I mean, if it were me, if I'm just having a conversation with somebody over a beverage and I explain this story, they're going to say, well, that guy's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not insane. So how do you make the jury understand that difference?
You know, that's such a great question, because I was sitting here listening to this doctor thinking the same thing to myself. Like, it's so confusing, the legal definition of insane, and then you listen to all these details that, yeah, it sounds like he's delusional, so he's saying that he seemed strange, that he seemed off, that he seemed to be, you know, kind of violating rules as he went along. But is that really legally insane such that he couldn't conform his behavior at the time of the crash? I mean, that's just like pulling all of these things and then bringing it down to a little question, which is the key point. How do you answer that question? And we ask the jurors to do that. I
know, and I think that's why the burden in this case is so critical, because it is much easier for them to just tip the scale 51%.
Yeah.
But it's not. They know that's the case.
Yeah.
I also think in the bottom line analysis, the jury's going to say we're going to let this guy off because of that. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. I think that juries, especially when you hear the insanity defense, and that it's such a horrific crime, jurors are thinking, but if we're going to chance it, in this case, we're going to chance it to make sure that society's safe, and we're not going to find him insane. I mean, that's, you know, jurors are
That's human nature, of course, of course. Okay, we'll be back with more. Loni Coombs, former LA DA, is here with me, and we'll have more in that Vermont courtroom when we come back. And we are back, folks. Welcome to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Michael Bryant with you for the afternoon session. We are still in Vermont in the Stephen Bourgoin case. And I want you to listen to this defense expert and keep one thing in mind. He's talking about two interactions he had with the defendant, also the report that he put together, most of that happening 2 years after the incident. So maybe the defendant had some time to kind of come up with some creative thinking and made up some stories. I don't know, but it's got to be factored into this guy's testimony. Let's go back into the courtroom.
Some of the things that were going on with his daughter as well. So his issues about anxiety, feeling safe, and his daughter. She doesn't really get into or doesn't document, and I didn't see in her depositions that she said, well, what's the safety issue? Safe about what? She doesn't get into that. She just does what I think is a very superficial exam and says, well, if you don't want to, if you don't want to stay, you got to go, and that's the interaction.
So, what does Mr. Bourgoin tell you about that interaction with the physician's assistant?
He didn't. He wanted to convey he wasn't safe, but he didn't feel comfortable saying why, because he's not sure that would make him less safe. It wouldn't make him less safe, and he didn't understand. He thought he was already in the hospital, right? He's on the gurney with the warm blankets. I'm here. What's happening?
So what did Mr. Bourgoin tell you he did?
He left. Put his clothes on and left.
And is that corroborated by the records at the hospital?
Yeah, he left before they could give him all of his discharge recommendations.
So the PA is in with him, the PA leaves, and what happens next according to the record?
The sitter was, apparently there's a mention of the sitter. The sitter wasn't, the PA comes back to give, the PA either sends the nurse back or the nurse comes back and says he's gone, because the PA had told the nurse, give him, so they say, discharge recommendations for follow-up care, the Howard Center, crisis, etc., if you don't want to stay. And so he never got those, never had a final interaction with the nurse, and he's gone.
So what does the sitter note when she goes back into the room?
He's gone.
What about the sitter?
I think the sitter was gone too. So
what does Mr. Bourgoin tell you about why he left the hospital?
They said I couldn't stay.
And So what does he do next? Or do you know what time it is that he leaves the hospital?
Yeah, it's 11:03 or 11:03, I think it was. So he gets there at 9:45, and then the tapes have him coming out, I think, at 11:03. I think there's a note from the PA at 11:08, approximately, if I remember right.
Okay, and so what's significant about those time frames?
Well, he's there for a good long time, and he thinks he's going to get admitted to the hospital, and suddenly he doesn't understand why he can't stay in the hospital.
And then it's 11 o'clock on Saturday, so what has Mr. Bourgoin missed at that point?
He's missed seeing Izzy.
Does Mr. Bourgoin talk about that with you?
Well, he knew he had missed Izzy. He certainly knew that by then.
And then what does Mr. Bourgoin say he does after the hospital?
He goes home.
And what does he do?
He goes to sleep on the couch downstairs because this is the day, I'm reminding myself, this is the day he's afraid Homeland Security might come and burn the house down.
So what does he do?
He falls asleep. He's been up for a couple of days.
And then, well, what happens after that? After he's home? This is Saturday now, midday, and then we're getting into the day and then the evening of the crash.
Yes.
I assume you spoke with Mr. Bourgoin at length about that?
I did.
Why was that important to do?
I wanted to know his mental state and what happened.
Would it be important or helpful for you to refer to your report during this portion of your discussion of what Mr. Bourgoin had to say?
Sure.
So Dr. Dave's still at it there, trying to help the defense prove the defendant was insane at the time of the accident. Loni Coombs is with me here. You made a good point in talking about some of his testimony where he talks about the defendant being afraid. So he went to the hospital. How does that square with his actions and what this doctor says he was thinking at the time?
Well, the doctor's saying he went for protection, but who goes to the hospital for protection? If you need protection, you go to the police. Why didn't he go to law enforcement and say, I'm afraid these people are coming and taking me? That's where you go for protection. Another question I was thinking, when you pointed out that this was 2 years later, that he's giving all of this detail to this doctor. How does he have such a good memory after 2 years? And if he was in this delusional state during this time, do you have a good memory of what you're thinking during your delusion? I mean, if I was the prosecutor, that's what I'd be cross-examining this doctor about.
Yes, his revisionist history over the last couple of years. And of course, what this defense expert needs is some sort of corroboration from other experts, other reports. But from what I've heard so far, there may be vague references, but nothing nearly as specific as what the defendant told him in this case. Now, let's talk about the jury again, because again, they're critical. They're the most important audience there. They're sitting there, they put themselves in the shoes of the defendant, and how did he get stressed out? What could have caused him? You know, we know that he had a couple of domestic assault issues. He was on probation from one. He had an upcoming trial. He's out of money. He quit his job. His house was being foreclosed on. He lost custody of Izzy, his little child. Okay, not good, not a good day.
Right.
But is that enough for the normal person sitting in the jury to say, boy, I would have cracked myself?
Yeah, I mean, I think people would say that was a very stressful day, and I might have done something, I might have been distraught, I might have been upset, I might have gone to seek help from someone. But what he did is so extreme. Is that the type of reaction you have when you've cracked, essentially? And that is the argument here, is that he cracked at some point, right, during this day.
Yeah, and again, you know, the jury has to be pounded into their heads that it was at the time of the accident.
Right.
Not before, when he might have been at the doctor or the hospital or didn't go for mental health. At the time he was behind the wheel of that car and took out those kids. Remember, there were 5 teen victims in this case. 4 of them 16 years old, 1 15 years old, just coming back to Burlington, Vermont from a concert. I mean, it was an innocuous evening, and look what happened. Just all hell broke loose. And now this guy is sitting there with the jury having to decide, does he get off the hook for doing it? I mean, that's a tough position to put this jury in, right?
Yeah, jurors have a very hard job. I mean, they are really asked to do a lot, but that's why they're so important in this case. You know, talking about this day in particular, we know from his history that he'd had a lot of stress in the past, too. So why was it this day that he actually
What tipped him over? What was
Yeah.
the last straw? Good point. Loni Coombs with me, former deputy DA from LA County, and the star of a new Oxygen show coming up called Death at the Mansion. We're going to talk about that in some detail here before the top of the hour. But for right now, let's take a break. We'll come back to Vermont in just a moment. folks, to the Law and Crime Network. We're still in Vermont. Stephen Bourgoin is on trial. 5 counts of second-degree murder pending, and the defense case is underway now. Dr. Dave for the defense, he is still on the stand, and we're going back into the courtroom.
As a meeting, he's going to be paired up with somebody. And he's concerned about the guy across the street who he knows works for Homeland Security, which I think is a true fact, not just a fantasized, paranoid fact.
Objection.
Let's just go through, we're going to do it this way. We're going to go through kind of what you do remember and about the evening, and then as we go forward, and then we'll fill in if we have to.
Okay.
So without getting it all exactly precise, what is your understanding of what Mr. Bourgoin has said about what occurred that evening, going into Saturday evening after he left his residence at 11:30?
He's driving, listening to the directions from the radio, and then he doesn't really know how he ended up going the wrong direction, and he doesn't understand it. It wasn't intentional, and then he remembers the impact, which he likened to helmet-to-helmet impact, like when he was playing football.
And what does Mr. Bourgoin tell you about what happens after the impact?
After the impact, he goes down to the median where there's the Jetta and the teenagers, and he looks at, and the car is aflame, and he looks in the front seat, and it looks like the 2 people in the front seat are like a mother and a daughter, and they look like CPR-type mannequins that appear to be breathing, and that he thought that was part of the test, that it was a setup, and that the setup, in fact, had something to do with making it look like, again, that he had been in an accident. This is part of the test, and they're still going to take him, and it's going to look like the setup. This is fake. This is set up by the powers, the they, and these and this setup of these fake people are part of the setup and the test, because there's some ulterior motive from these government powers to make it look like it was a real accident.
What does he say happens next?
Then he sees lights. These are lights, white lights. He sees white lights and blue lights, and he think that's the next part, that he has to escape or get it. The next part of his, he likened it to his training in the military. Evade, escape. This is part of the, part of the SEER training, SEER training, that, when pilots are shot down, evade, escape. I forget what the other 2 parts of that acronym are. Resist, I think that's when you get to interrogation. And he remembered, so he's saying, oh, my next part, what I have to do next for this test to meet up with this companion or whatever this person is, of a feminine kind of companion who's directing this, he had the sense, is to go to get, and that car has been provided for me by the government that's putting all these pieces there for me, just like they've been doing for the past couple of days. And so he gets into the police car, Shepard's police car.
And what does Mr. Bourgoin tell you he does next?
He starts driving, and he sees cars. He says, I'm being careful not to hit anybody. He sees cars, and he interprets after a short while that, in fact, even though he's going the correct direction, he's going the wrong direction. He also says that when he was in the car, in the police car, he pushed a bunch of buttons and toggles or whatever they are, I think buttons, he says, and various lights changed, and he's listening to the radio. in the car. He's listening to what the radio says and making inferences from the radio about what he's supposed to do.
And what does Mr. Bourgoin tell you he does next?
He turns around because he thinks he's going the wrong direction, even though he's going the correct direction.
What does Mr. Bourgoin say happens next?
He does not remember the impact with his own truck. Not surprisingly,
Why not surprisingly?
because he had massive facial injuries and a concussion, and generally people who have severe concussions don't remember the moment of impact. They get a slight bit of retrograde amnesia from the moment of the concussion, when the brain's concussed, and he had multiple facial fractures, 4 or 5 of them, that ultimately caused him to have cerebral edema and almost die, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
So what, in your opinion, is going on with Mr. Bourgoin from the moment he leaves his house until the time of the first accident?
He's following the directions from his delusions of reference about what to do to be safe and to follow directions from the government or whatever agencies were directing him. And he's terrified. He's terrified.
So is he, again, we got these ideas of reference and delusional? Is he
Delusions of reference. Yep.
Delusions of reference, okay. And is the term psychotic the term?
Yes, he's floridly psychotic.
So what does that mean, to be floridly psychotic?
He's grossly psychotic. He's just not mildly psychotic. He's out of it.
So showing you poster board with, again, with something from the DSM-5, is that correct?
Yeah.
And psychotic features, is that the definition of psychotic features?
Yeah, so a psychosis is one of 4 things. You know, you can hear voices. He never claimed to hear voices. Doesn't hear voices. Doesn't hallucinate. Didn't malinger that he was hallucinating. You can have what's called a formal thought disorder, where the form of your thinking, the organization of your thinking, is disorganized. You can tell that.
So here we have very important testimony from Dr. Dave suggesting that the defendant was not only psychotic, which was helpful in proving insanity, but also that at the time of the incident, he may not have known what he was doing was wrong. He couldn't control himself, and I think that's the key in this case, control. I have with me here Loni Coombs, and we're going to take a quick break from Vermont to talk about something very important, a project you have going on. Loni, by the way, used to be the LA County Deputy District Attorney in Malibu. They call it the riding DA in Malibu, something like that?
Deputy in charge.
Deputy in charge. That's how we met. I was covering hard-hitting cases for Extra. And so, you know, some of those cases got very interesting, and I'm sure over time you had a chance to meet with some interesting defendants, or at least their counsel. So I'm going to do a little something now, a little exercise. Wait, let me hear about the show first before we get to that. Let me hear about the show.
Okay.
This is going to be on Oxygen.
It's on Oxygen, and it's a 4-part limited series about Rebecca Zahow. And I don't know if you remember this case. It happened in Coronado Island in 2011. This woman was found hanging outside a balcony outside. She was nude. She had her hands bound behind her back, her feet bound, a gag in her mouth. And people saw that and were like, what in the world happened here? And the police ended up ruling it a suicide. So for the years since then, people have had a lot of questions about what it was. And in this case, we actually dig deep into it. I have a team with me. It's me as a former prosecutor, and then Billy Jensen, who is a crime journalist. He's a victim's advocate, and he's had a lot of success using social media to solve crimes. And then we have Paul Holes assisting us, who many people recognize the name in a connection with the Golden State Killer. He helped solve that. He's a forensic scientist and also an investigator. So as a team, we dig deep and we look at this case to see what else is going on here.
Okay, and that's coming up when? When's the first episode?
June 1st.
June 1st. Oxygen.
6 p.m., 5 o'clock Central on Oxygen. It'll be 4 Saturday nights in a row. Cool. So that's June for you.
Okay. It's going to be tremendous. That story is a mystery. It is a mystery wrapped in a puzzle and all of those other things. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me play a little exercise with you now, okay? This is called Name That Defendant.
Oh, boy.
And what did he or she do? What's the first? Can we see the first one? Because I know you had some involved. Oh, there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So tell me what's going on here.
This is my favorite mugshot of all time. This was Nick Nolte. And he was arrested for driving under the influence of GHB, I believe.
And what did you guys do to him there in Malibu? What was the penalty? Do you remember?
It was a standard DUI, I believe.
3 years probation, does that sound right?
It was probation, and then, a fine and an alcohol program.
Okay.
And he was actually, I will say, a very lovely defendant and very humble and apologetic. I actually give him a lot of credit. And like a lot of defendants, he was a very nice person.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you meted out some justice to a celebrity. Loni Coombs, thank you so much for being here. Good luck with the show on Oxygen on June 1. Michael Bryant with you. We're going to continue on right here on the Law and Crime Network back in Vermont and a few other cases. Stay with us.